Hi, my name is Michael. I'm a folklorist, or at least I used to be. I want to try and explain what happened that fall in Kentucky, in a town you won't find on any modern map. It was called Silence Creek. Now, when I experience absolute silence, I don't feel peace. I feel a cold sweat on my skin, because I know what's really hiding behind the quiet. It all started with simple bad luck. I was driving through the Appalachians, gathering material for my dissertation on local legends. My old Ford decided its journey was over and broke down on a remote mountain road where my phone hadn't had service for hours. Luckily, I saw a sign nearby, carved into dark wood, Silence Creek, 2 miles. I had no choice. A 2-mile hike with a heavy backpack under a gloomy October sky wasn't the worst-case scenario. The town looked like it was frozen in time. Neat wooden houses, a stone church, a main street with a few shops, and silence. A thick, almost tangible silence. There was none of the usual hustle and bustle of a small town. People moved slowly, spoke quietly. But what immediately caught my eye were the bells. Thousands of small metal bells hanging everywhere, on porches, from tree branches, above shop doors. They came in various sizes and shapes, but they all had one thing in common. Not a single one had a clapper. They were mute. I was greeted with a strange, almost excessive friendliness. The local mechanic, a burly man named Silas, assured me he could fix my car, but it would take a few days to order the part. He suggested I stay at the town's only inn, the Quiet Haven. The owner, an elderly woman named Martha, smiled so genuinely it felt a little unnatural. "You're in luck," she said, handing me a key. "You've arrived just in time for our annual festival of silent bells, the most important day of the year for us." As a folklorist, I couldn't pass up such an opportunity. I started asking questions, but my inquiries were met with polite but vague answers. "It's an old tradition," Silas would say. "We honor the founders and the quiet they gifted us." "The bells are a symbol of our community," Martha explained. No one would talk about the festival's history, its origins. Any attempt to dig deeper was met with an awkward silence or a sharp change of subject. The room at the inn was clean but simple. From the window I could see the townsfolk preparing for the festival, hanging even more silent bells, decorating the streets with garlands of dried flowers. Their friendliness didn't waver, but I started to sense something else beneath it. Tension. Their smiles didn't reach their eyes. Their quiet conversations would cease the moment I approached. I was an outsider, and it seemed my presence was upsetting some fragile balance. The evening before the festival, while sitting in the local diner, I dared to ask the waitress, a young girl with frightened eyes, about the rules. "Oh, they're simple," she whispered, looking over her shoulder. "Tomorrow, when the sun sets, everyone must be indoors. No loud noises, no talking, only whispers. And no matter what you hear outside, don't leave. Stay inside until the great bell in the church rings at dawn. That means it's over." "And what happens if someone breaks the silence?" I asked. She turned pale. "It will hear, and it will come." "What is it?" The girl just shook her head and hurried away. I slept poorly that night. The girl's words haunted me. This tradition no longer seemed like a charming quirk. It was a ritual born of fear. The next day, the tension in town peaked. People rushed to finish their final preparations. Their movements were brisk, their faces grim. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the streets emptied instantly. A moment before the last ray of light vanished behind the mountain ridge, I returned to the inn. Martha was standing on the porch. "Remember the rules, Mr. Michael," she said, and her voice held none of its usual warmth. "Lock your door, draw your curtains, and be silent." I did as she said. I locked the door to my room, drew the heavy curtains. And then silence fell. Not just quiet, it was a dead, oppressive, absolute silence. Not a sound from the street, not a footstep in the hall, not a voice. Even the wind seemed to have died. The hours passed. I tried to read but couldn't focus. All my attention was tuned to the sounds that weren't there. It was a form of torture. The silence pressed in, constricting, maddening. And then I heard it. First, it was a faint, thin, melodic chime. It was quiet, as if from a great distance. I froze. It was impossible. All the bells in town were mute. I walked to the window, my heart pounding. I pulled back the edge of the curtain by a millimeter and looked out onto the dark street. The street was empty, but the chiming continued. It was pure, beautiful, and utterly terrifying. It wasn't coming from one place. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. And then I understood. The chiming wasn't on the street. It was inside my head. But it wasn't a hallucination, because along with the chime in my head, I began to hear something else, outside. A soft, scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged slowly across the ground. The scraping grew closer. Then another sound joined it, a faint clicking noise. With a jolt of horror, I realized it was the sound of the silent bells, which had begun to sway slightly, bumping against each other, though there was no wind. Something was walking down the street. I looked through the crack in the curtain again. For a moment, I saw nothing, and then, in the weak moonlight, I saw movement. It was tall and incredibly thin. Its limbs were too long, and it moved in a jerky, unnatural way. I couldn't see a face, but I could feel it was searching for something. It would stop at each house, tilting its head as if listening to the silence, or for any sound that might break it. It was getting closer to my inn. Panic flooded me. I stumbled back from the window, clamping my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. The melodic chime in my head grew louder, unbearable. The creature stopped directly below my window. The scraping and clicking ceased. I froze, afraid to breathe. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears, and I prayed it couldn't hear it too. An eternity passed, and then I heard the doorknob on the first floor of the inn slowly, creakily turn. I don't remember the rest of the night. I huddled in a corner, covering my ears, and sat there until dawn, flinching at every imagined sound. The terror only ended when the loud, deafening toll of the great bell from the church shattered the morning air. I didn't wait for Silas. I grabbed my backpack, left cash for the room on the desk, and ran out of town. To my astonishment, my Ford was in the same spot on the road, but it had been repaired. The keys were in the ignition. I don't know who fixed it, and I didn't want to know. Since then, I avoid quiet places. Sometimes when I'm alone, I hear it again. The faint, melodic chime ringing deep inside my consciousness. And I understand that on that night in Silence Creek, it wasn't looking for someone who could break the silence. It was looking for someone who could hear its song. And it found me.
Hi, I'm Anna. Music is my entire life. I'm a violinist with perfect pitch, and to me, the world has always been a symphony of sounds. The creak of a floorboard, the hum of a refrigerator, the distant wail of a siren. For me, everything has its own note, its own frequency. I thought it was a gift, but the last 6 months have turned that gift into a curse that has nearly driven me insane. And it all started with a hum. I live in a large apartment in an old building in Chicago. A beautiful place with thick walls, high ceilings, and most importantly, excellent soundproofing. Or so I thought. One Tuesday evening, while practicing, I paused to make a mark on my sheet music, and in that brief moment of silence, I heard it. A very low, barely perceptible hum. So low it was felt more in the chest than heard. I guessed it was on the edge of audibility, somewhere around 20-30 hertz. I didn't think anything of it. Maybe the fridge was running a weird cycle. Maybe a generator was running somewhere down the street. I continued playing. But the next evening, and the evening after, the hum was there. It never went away. It was constant, monotonous, unchanging. It became the background noise of my life. At first, I tried to find its source. I unplugged every appliance in my apartment, shut off the main power breaker. The hum continued. I pressed my ear to the walls, the floor, the ceiling. It was everywhere and nowhere. I asked my neighbors. The elderly couple downstairs, the young family upstairs, the artist next door. They all looked at me with confusion. A hum? No, we don't hear anything. It's always so quiet over here. I called an electrician. He checked all the wiring. Nothing. I called a plumber. He checked the pipes. Nothing. I even hired an acoustical engineer. He came with his equipment and measured the sound levels. His verdict? Your apartment is one of the quietest places I've ever been in. No low-frequency vibrations outside the normal range. His words hit me harder than any sound. I wasn't just the only one who heard the hum. I was the only one for whom it existed. It was then that a cold, sticky fear took root in my mind. What if the problem wasn't the building? What if the problem was me? The hum began to destroy me. My perfect pitch turned into an instrument of torture. I heard it constantly. It kept me from sleeping. I'd wake up in the middle of the night feeling my bones vibrate. It kept me from working. I couldn't focus on the purity of the violin sound because that dirty, low tone was always in the background. It would bleed into the music, distorting it. I started making mistakes, botching performances. I became a shadow of myself. I lost weight. Dark circles formed under my eyes. I tried to drown the hum out. I bought expensive noise-canceling headphones. It seeped through. I turned on white noise generators at full volume. It pulsed underneath. It seemed to exist on some other plane, inaccessible to technology, but fully accessible to my hearing. The isolation was the worst part. My friends tried to be supportive, but I could see the doubt and pity in their eyes. They started suggesting I see a doctor, hinting at psychological issues, at stress. I started to doubt myself. Maybe it was an auditory hallucination, maybe it was tinnitus, though it was nothing like ringing in the ears. Maybe I was going insane. I started keeping a journal. I recorded every detail, the time, the volume, though it never changed, my emotions. I tried to find a pattern, and one day I did. I was sitting on my couch in the throes of despair, thinking about just moving out, abandoning everything. And in that moment, I noticed something odd. The hum changed for a second. Its frequency dipped almost imperceptibly by a fraction of a tone and then returned to normal. It was so fast I might have missed it, but I didn't. I decided to run an experiment. I focused and thought about something specific, something emotional, my first recital. And again, the hum twitched slightly. I tried again, thinking of my late mother. The same reaction. The blood ran cold in my veins. It was impossible, but the only explanation I could think of was terrifying. The hum was reacting. It was reacting to my thoughts, to my strong emotions. This discovery brought no relief. It brought a new, even deeper horror. I wasn't just hearing a sound. I was in contact with something. Something was listening to me, listening to my thoughts. I stopped trusting my own mind. I became afraid to think, afraid to feel. I tried to keep my mind blank, to turn into a clean slate so I wouldn't provoke a reaction, but that's impossible. And the hum continued, now a constant reminder that I was not alone in my own consciousness. I don't know what it is. Is it some unknown form of energy that resonates with my brain? Is it something not of this world? Or have I finally lost my mind and this is all just a complex game of my subconscious? I'm writing this now, sitting in silence. Well, my silence. The hum is pulsing in my bones, as always. But I know now that it's not just noise. It's a presence. It's here with me, in this room. It's listening as I formulate these words in my head. And I think it's curious to see what I'll do next. To be honest, so am I, because I have a feeling this is only the beginning.
Hi, my name is Clara. I want to tell you about a smell. It sounds strange, I know, but this smell destroyed my life, my mind, my perception of reality. And it all began with a beautiful old wardrobe. I've always loved antiques. Every piece has a history, a soul. I'm an interior designer, and my own apartment in Portland was my pride and joy, a perfect blend of modern minimalism and vintage accents. One day, I came across an estate sale for an old manor that was about to be demolished. And there, in the corner of a dusty room, I saw it. A tall wardrobe made of dark, carved wood with tarnished brass handles and a mirror that had clouded with age. It was perfect, and it cost next to nothing. When the wardrobe was delivered to my apartment and installed in my bedroom, I was thrilled. It added a layer of charm and mystery to the room. Of course, it had a smell, the typical scent of old furniture, a mix of mothballs, dust, and dry wood. I aired it out, wiped the inside with a vinegar solution, and placed lavender sachets inside. I figured the smell would be gone in a few days. It didn't go away. Instead, it started to change. The familiar musty scent began to fade, and in its place, something else emerged. Something faint, strange. It was a sweetish smell, like overripe fruit beginning to spoil, but with a heavy, almost cloying undertone. It was the smell of life in decay, the smell of sweet rot. At first, I only noticed it when I opened the wardrobe. I cleaned it again and again, using every odor eliminator I could find. Nothing worked. The smell became a part of my bedroom. I would wake up in the morning and smell it in the air. My boyfriend Ben noticed it too. "Yeah, weird smell," he said, sniffing. "Must be the old wood. It'll air out." But it didn't air out. It grew thicker, richer. I started to find traces of it on my clothes that were stored inside. Even after washing, I could detect a faint, sweetish taint. It began to infuriate me. I lined the inside of the wardrobe with cedar panels, hoping their strong scent would overpower the rot. It worked for a day. Then, the sweet smell returned, mingling with the cedar in a combination that was even more nauseating. Ben started to complain. "Clara, I can't sleep in here, that stench." We started sleeping on the couch in the living room. My perfect bedroom had become a forbidden zone. The fear began when I realized the smell was no longer tied to the wardrobe. One morning, I was making coffee in the kitchen at the opposite end of the apartment, and I suddenly smelled it, clear as day. It was there, with me, like an invisible cloud. I frantically sniffed everything around me. Nothing. A moment later, it was gone. But now I knew it could move. This turned into torture. I was constantly sniffing the air, Every breath was laced with anxiety. I stopped inviting friends over. I was embarrassed. Although, when my friend Emily did stop by, she noticed nothing. "Smells like coffee in your perfume," she said. "You're being paranoid." Her words scared me even more. Was I imagining it? Was it a phantom smell? A symptom of some illness? I even went to a doctor. He found nothing. He said stress can cause things like this, advising me to get more rest. But how could I rest when the smell was becoming more and more real? It started to take on a texture. I could taste it on my tongue when I ate, a sweet, sickly flavor that ruined any meal. I could feel it on my skin, like a greasy, invisible film, even after a shower. It had seeped into my life, into my very being. Ben couldn't take it. We fought constantly. I was obsessed with the smell, and he was tired of living in an apartment that, in his words, smelled like a funeral home's flower shop. One day, he just packed his bags and left. I was alone. Alone with the smell. And that's when things got much worse. I started to see things, barely perceptible movements in my peripheral vision, a dark shape darting past the doorway. I knew it was a trick of my mind, exhausted by insomnia and stress. But every time I saw this movement, a particularly strong wave of the sweet, rotting smell would fill the apartment, as if the thing I saw was its source. I decided I had to get rid of the wardrobe. I called a junk removal service. When the two workers came to haul it away, I asked them hopefully, "Do you smell anything? A weird odor?" They looked at each other. "Smells like old wood, ma'am, nothing else." When they carried it out, I felt an incredible sense of relief. I opened every window, turned on the air purifier, and lit incense. For a few hours, the apartment smelled fresh. I cried with happiness. It was over. But when I went to sleep that night in the empty room where the wardrobe once stood, I smelled it again. Faint at first, then growing stronger. The sweet smell of rot. And then it hit me. A soul-crushing, hair-raising realization. It was never the wardrobe. The wardrobe was just the vessel. It brought the smell into my home, and then the smell found a new host. Me. I moved. I abandoned that apartment, leaving almost all of my belongings behind, as if trying to shed an old skin. I live in a new, sterile place now, but it didn't help. The smell is still with me. Sometimes it almost disappears, and I start to hope. And then it returns. On the subway, at the office, in the middle of the night. It reminds me it's there. It's my constant, invisible companion. I don't know what it is, and I don't know what it wants, but I know it's slowly consuming me, turning my world into something sweet and decaying. And the most terrifying part is that sometimes when I look in the mirror, I think I can see a dark shape in my peripheral vision standing right behind me.